bit.
Ouch. Are you okay? Yeah. On today's episode, I'll talk to you about harmony, the lush red carpet for melodies to stroll on. What you're watching is my training in Aikido. Aikido is a very philosophical martial art in that you blend with the attack. Aikido literally means the way of harmony, and harmony is non-dissension, convergence, and consonance. In music theory and practice, harmony is the sound of two or more notes heard simultaneously. When played together, these usually 3 or 4 notes will create what is referred to as a chord. Furthermore, when you apply a rhythm to these notes in succession, the ear will perceive this movement as a chord, much in the same way as the eye perceives movement in the many frames of a film. These notes in succession are often called an arpeggio. You should not confuse an arpeggio with a melody, as this beautiful example of an Otis Redding ballad will show.
I've been loving you too long to stop now.
As you heard, both the piano and guitar were not playing chords per se, but doing arpeggios so as to give the arrangement some movement, some groove. Harmony is the vertical aspect of music. The majority of the world's music is non-harmonic. Harmony, as it is used and keeps evolving in Western music, is a fairly recent invention with a comparatively limited geographic spread. It was created less than a millennium ago in the music of Western Europe, and is embraced today only in those musical cultures that can trace their origins to that area. There are plenty of resources in the web about the theoretical aspects of harmony. In the description box below, I will link some of my favorite resources on this subject. Lola, will you please leave? Since this channel is focused on the self-schooled composer, I think that the perspective that I can contribute to with this matter is the lesser-known aspect of studying harmony. You see, there are 2 ways of approaching harmony, through theory and intuition. Most of my favorite musicians and composers are self-schooled. Buddy Rich, Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, Wes Montgomery. In film scoring, you have Danny Elfman and Hans Zimmer, who are basically self-schooled. And don't think that you do not possess any musical intuition, because everybody does. See, if I asked you to score a tense scene for a movie using only 1 note, would you instinctively choose this one? Or this one? See what I mean? Let's face it, what we call musical talent is truly inner ear development. I've always had an affinity for figuring out music by ear. I call that ear transcription. And ear transcription is not the same thing as ear training. Ear training is recognizing notes, intervals, and chords, whereas ear transcription is identifying those same elements and simultaneously identifying the timbre, exact volume, interpretation, vibrato, and precise amount of attack, release, and sustain for the very same musical passage.
Check out how guitarist Mark Knopfler chooses to open his expressive solo on Sultans of Swing. By the way, the opening note is a perfect 5th above the underlying chord.
So take that very first phrase of his solo. He starts on an A, finishes on an E, but you know, all the details are like in the bends of the notes, the vibratos, so those details are as important as the phrase itself. It's important for you to have a really good book on music theory so that you understand how to write music. But figuring out stuff by ear is invaluable because it will create a kind of musical phrase library in your brain, and that skill will be a crucial element for you to come up with chords, themes, and melodies in your film cues. Many of my favorite composers say they had to abandon their theoretical training so as to develop something new and original with their compositions. Check out Igor Stravinsky saying how he approached writing his masterpiece, The Rite of Spring.
I was guided by no system whatever in the Sacre du Printemps. Very little immediate tradition lies behind the Sacre du Printemps, and no theory. I had only my ear to help me. I heard, and I wrote what I heard. I am the vessel through which the Sacre passed.
The composers, as well as the listeners' search for development in Western music has been one of stability and compromise. The compromise is in how we perceive the succession of notes in terms of their consonants. This last concept keeps evolving due to our getting used to certain intervals that in previous times were perceived as unwarranted or simply evil. Due to the harmonic series, which I will discuss in a future video, Western harmonies first explored intervals, which would soon group themselves as harmonies, were first the octave, then the perfect fifth. These two intervals leap out of the harmonic series, showing themselves off as being the most consonant or stable intervals. Then the perfect fourths join them for being perfectly stable for some uses, not so much for others. The very traumatized by an inferiority complex, imperfect degrees, the second, third, sixth, and seventh had to be classified as major or minor. They were considered fairly stable, but only semi-consonant, and the infamous raised fourth degree, known as the tritone, or in the Middle Ages, Diabolus in musica. That was a no-no, pure evil. Check out the use of the tritone in Jimi Hendrix's wonderfully tense opening of Purple Haze. However, check out this very light-hearted use of the Diabolus in musica in Danny Elfman's The Simpsons theme. So with this clever use of the sixth degree, he manages to resolve the tension of the phrase by finishing on the perfect fifth. Side note, I played the drums for Danny Elfman's wedding when I was living in Los Angeles. He wanted to hear a Brazilian batucada as soon as he kissed the bride. Smart dude. So the fifth degree is actually so perfect that it might as well represent your ticket back home. You see, The greatest conquest of Western music was to realize that there is amazing symmetry in the tempered scale, and I will discuss more about that in a future video. Take the C major scale, for example. All you have to do is add a third and a fifth to it, and you have lovely juicy chords. Now remember that the third is imperfect, so it will vary as you climb up the chord tones. However, the fifth is always stable and perfect, remember? Did you notice that I never abandoned the white notes? So we're in C major. These three-note groups are called triads, and they gave birth to our polyphonic tonal system. The earliest use of a four-note chord was due to the influence of the perfect fifth. This chord is based on the fifth degree, not of the note scale, but of the chord scale. By the way, when referring to a note scale, we use numbers, and when referring to a chord scale, we use the Roman numerals. We're just applying the same principle of using the scale tones for the triads, only now we are forming tetrachords. Check out the ear candy gravitational pull that the fifth chord has in relationship to the one chord. Differently than the perfect fifth interval, the fifth chord degree is quite unstable due to the presence of the fourth and seventh scale degree, creating the tritone. Yes, the diabolus in musica. The earliest use of the tetrachord was that of a major triad with a minor seventh added for good measure. This is known as the dominant chord. Beats me why though, because I have to say I've yet to hear a more dominated chord than the dominant chord. Most of Western music, be it Baroque, classical, romantic, or pop, is based on this empowering link between the five and the one chord. It's the sweet homecoming, pure comfort food for our listening pleasure.
We're going home. We made love.
So the fifth interval is perfect. The five chord is dominant and at the same time dominated. Do you see a pattern here? Well, you're not alone. Music theorists from early on discovered the unyielding power of this fifth pitch in the harmonic series and came up with the most brilliant and used of all music graphs, the circle of fifths. Let's check it out.
So, scales in traditional Western music are generally organized in 7-note sequences, which will keep repeating at every new octave. Notes in the over 4,000 commonly used scales are separated by whole and half-step intervals of tones and semitones, the two most used configurations being the major and the minor scales. The 12 notes that form an octave provide us with a peculiar scale where all the notes are the same distance apart, 1/2 step. This configuration is known as the chromatic or 12-tone scale. In a C chromatic scale, all the black keys of the keyboard will be labeled as sharp as you go up and flat as you come down. These note equivalences are referred to as enharmonic. Since we're speaking of 12 notes, a great way to organize them would be using the face of a clock. This sequential formation, like numbers on a clock, though, provide us with no information on how to possibly use chords and give us no insight on music theory. However, reorganizing these very same notes in a clockwise manner by a distance of perfect fifths, we come up with the greatest musical theory tool ever, the circle of fifths. Dating all the way back to the 17th century, in the circle of fifths we have the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, as well as the 12 diatonic key signatures with their respective sharps and flats in a kind of mirror image. The outer letters of the circle each represent the major scale with that note as tonic or fundamental. The inner letters represent that key's relative minor. Also, from the 11 to the 5 o'clock position, clockwise, it will show you the order of sharps, F, C, G, D, A, E, B, and counterclockwise, it will show you the order of flats, B, E, A, D, G, C, F. More surprisingly, the circle of fifths will provide you with all the available chords for each key. Take, for example, our 12 o'clock position. We're in the key of C major, which has no sharps or flats. To our left, we have F, which in terms of scale degrees is a perfect fourth above C. And in chord degrees, F major is the subdominant or the fourth chord of C. And to the right of our 12 o'clock key, we have G, a perfect fifth above C, and as G major, the dominant or 5 chord of C major. So we have the 3 major chords in the key of C, C, F, and G. How about the minor chords? We've already established that the relative minor or 6th chord is below each letter. In this case, A minor. Again, to the left of C in the inner circle, we have D minor, or the 2 chord. And to the right of C in the inner circle, we have E minor, or the 3 chord. So now you have all the minor chords that belong to the key of C major. A minor, D minor, and E minor. So the only degree missing is the 7 chord. But since it's a diminished triad, it really isn't as useful as the other 6 degrees. So we can shift this example anywhere inside the circle. Say we're in the key of E major. To the left, we have the 4 chord, or A major, and to the right, we have B major, or the 5 chord. C sharp minor is the 6 chord, F sharp minor the 2 chord, and for the 3 chord, G sharp minor, and so on. So the circle of fifths is an invaluable tool when you need to transpose or modulate a piece you're working on.
So in case that you may want to have all the chord scales handy, including the dreaded diminished or half-diminished 7th degree, I have provided for you 2 handy chord scale graphs, one for reference when using triads, the other for tetrachords in all keys. Feel free to download them. They will provide a quick reference of all the available chords in each key for your compositions. As a final thought, please be aware that most directors nowadays work with temp tracks. A temp track is a piece of music that the director and the sound editor of a particular scene will put in as a guide of what you could write for that cue. I've read some strong language on film composers forums stating that John Williams stole ideas from Gustav Holst, The Planets. You see, George Lucas didn't use a temp track. Instead, he explicitly told John Williams to score several parts of the movie exactly like the planets. He knew what he wanted, and John Williams was just trying to please the director. Besides, the melodies are different. It's just an influence. So the more music you absorb through your listening brain, the more themes and motifs you will be able to pick out of thin air for your scores. There's so many great books on harmony. I guess you really have to know what you're looking for. Some will be more focused on classical harmony, of course. Others will be more focused on jazz. To me, a really well-rounded book is this one written by Keith Wyatt and Carl Schroeder of Musicians Institute, California. Harmony and Theory. It's fantastic because it covers from, just basic intervals to triads, tetrachords, even further advanced chords, and it has a great learning curve. Also, the exercises are already within the book, so you do them by pencil, you erase them, start over. Great tool. I also want to recommend this version of The Planets here. The London Philharmonic, this work that I covered in this episode is just amazing. I mean, the harmonies, the tensions and resolutions, the orchestration, it's a classic. And this one here has Bernard Herrmann conducting. He was the film scorer for most of the Hitchcock movies, the best ones as far as I'm concerned. And he also did Taxi Driver, which was just an amazing score. Highly recommended. Thank you so much for joining me on this video about harmony. I hope it inspires you to create luscious red carpets for your melodies. Please remember to hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.